The air in the 17th Precinct's Major Crimes Unit was thick and stale, smelling of old coffee, dust, and the metallic tang of dried blood on forgotten evidence. Detective Eli Vance ran a hand over his close-cropped, graying hair, the movement slow, heavy with a fatigue that went deeper than lack of sleep. It was the fatigue of looking into the abyss too often that he was pouring himself a fifth cup of day-old sludge when the desk phone rang, a shrill, insistent sound in the pre-dawn silence. It was 3:47 a.m. Calls at this hour were never good. They were always the ones that stuck. Vance, he answered, his voice a low gravel. Detective, this is Sergeant Miller. We got a situation. The Hawthorne House. Eli stiffened. The Hawthorne House. Everyone in the city of Blackwood Creek knew the name. It wasn't just a dilapidated mansion on the outskirts of town, it was a local legend, a grotesque monument to a century of whispers, missing persons, unexplained fires, and a mass suicide of a family cult back in the 70s. The city council had condemned it 3 times, but the owner, a reclusive trust, always found a loophole. What about it? Eli asked, his mind already cycling through protocols. A 9/11 hang-up came in. Just white noise for a second, then a scream. Female, sounded young. Patrol Unit 4 Sierra responded. They reported nothing initially. House was dark, quiet, doors locked. But then, 10 minutes ago, they radioed a code 99, officer needs assistance, nonspecific, and their GPS beacon flatlined right outside the property gate. Eli swore under his breath. A code 99 from a missing patrol car was a red flag the size of a hearse. I'm on my way. Don't send anyone else until I get eyes on. And get me a bolo on Units 4 Sierra and 4 Bravo's personnel, Officers Jennings and Taft. Eli grabbed his worn leather jacket and his service weapon. As he headed for the door, he stopped by the vacant desk next to his. It was spotless, perfectly organized. That desk belonged to his new partner, Detective Sarah Reyes. Sarah had joined the Major Crimes Unit 6 months ago, a transfer from the Cyber Unit. She was sharp, meticulous, and possessed an unsettling calm that Eli hadn't figured out yet. She often knew things before the evidence did. He didn't understand her methods, but her clearance rate was undeniable. She was also rarely in the precinct during the late-night hours, preferring to work her own erratic schedule. Knock. 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 A soft rap came from the door frame, making Eli jump. Sarah stood there, silhouetted against the fluorescent hum of the main corridor. She was dressed in dark, non-regulation clothes, a black turtleneck and tactical pants, holding a sleek tablet and a large, oddly shaped flashlight. She didn't look tired. She looked expectant. The Hawthorne House, she stated, her voice quiet, almost a breath, yet cutting through the silence. The emergency call was an audio loop. Detective Vance. A splice. The initial scream was recorded from a 2012 cold case file, the missing student, Eliza Cross. Eli stared at her, his stomach knotting. How the hell did you know that? It just happened. I monitor the emergency dispatch channel. I compared the acoustic signature instantly. But the patrol car's distress signal, the code 99, that was real. A burst transmission. And it contained a single, repeating character in the metadata. She held up the tablet, displaying a complex, cryptic symbol, a jagged spiral crossed with a broken line. It's not in any known police or military alphabet. Eli's exhaustion was instantly replaced by a cold, adrenaline-fueled dread. This wasn't a standard missing persons or a prank. This was deliberate. This was a lure. Get in the car, Reyes, Eli grunted, pocketing the image of the symbol. We're rolling out. And you stick to me. We're not playing ghost hunters, we're finding my 2 officers. Sarah nodded, her expression unreadable. I know, Detective. But I also know where we're heading. And I have a theory. Whatever is happening at Hawthorne, it hasn't happened in a long time. And it always starts with something stolen. The drive to the Hawthorne House was a blur of flashing blues and reds reflecting off the rain-slicked suburban streets. The city of Blackwood Creek had fallen into a deep, wet silence that seemed to swallow the sound of their unmarked cruiser. When Detectives Vance and Reyes arrived, the scene was exactly as Miller had described, unsettlingly quiet. The Hawthorne House stood isolated behind a wrought iron gate that leaned inward, permanently warped by age and neglect. The house itself was a sprawling Victorian Gothic nightmare, all sharp gables, blackened wood, and windows like vacant, staring eyes. A single, uniformed patrol car, Unit 4 Sierra, was parked crookedly just inside the fence line. Its beacon lights were dead, and its driver's side door hung open, resting against the muddy grass. Eli killed the engine, the sudden silence amplified tenfold. He gripped his flashlight, the beam cutting a weak swathe through the pervasive gloom. Reyes, stick close. We go by the book until we know what we're facing. Non-lethal force unless absolutely necessary, Eli commanded, stepping out into the cold, damp air. Sarah already had her own gear out, a small, high-powered LED light and a specialized forensics kit. Duly noted, Detective Vance. But the book rarely accounts for this kind of theatrical staging. They approached the patrol car cautiously. The interior light was off, and the radio was silent, the microphone hanging loose. Officers Jennings and Taft? Eli called out, his voice echoing back from the dark, imposing facade of the house. Nothing. Eli reached into the vehicle. The keys were still in the ignition. Everything seemed to be in place, except the officers. He ran his hand over the driver's seat. Vance, look at this, Sarah said quietly, pointing her narrow beam at the seat where Officer Jennings would have been sitting. There was a patch of residue there, an impossibly fine layer of dark, crystalline material. It wasn't ash from a fire, it was solid, heavy, and absorbed the light instead of reflecting it. It looked like pulverized obsidian, or perhaps something even darker. Eli carefully scooped a tiny pinch onto a clean evidence card. What is it? Looks like volcanic glass. Sarah's eyes narrowed as she examined it under a jeweler's loupe. It's inorganic. But look at the molecular structure. It's organized. Almost encoded. Detective, this isn't ash. It's a precipitated chemical, and the structure matches the repeating symbol from the distress signal metadata. She pulled up the tablet, displaying the jagged spiral crossed with a broken line. The structure of the residue, when viewed microscopically, seemed to mimic the shape. The symbol is a signature. Vance, Sarah breathed. Whatever entity took the officers used this material as a transitional medium. A teleportation, a phase shift, or maybe a way to seal the exit. A sudden sound ripped through the silence, making both detectives instinctively drop into a defensive crouch. Chime. Chime. Chimed. It wasn't a church bell or a clock tower. It was the synchronized, antique sound of dozens of different grandfather, mantle, and cuckoo clocks ringing together, emanating from inside the house. The sound was deafeningly precise, a discordant wave of metallic music. Eli checked his watch. 4:11 a.m., the clocks within the Hawthorne House were chiming a deep, resonant 3:33 a.m. Impossible, Eli muttered, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. They're all set to the wrong time. And they're ringing in unison. No, Detective, Sarah corrected, her hand moving slowly toward her sidearm, her eyes scanning the dark windows of the house. They're not set to the wrong time. They're set to their time. And 3:33 a.m. is the witching hour's reflection. As the final, lingering chime faded, a deep, pervasive humming began. It wasn't an electrical sound, it felt vibrational, originating from deep within the earth, traveling up through the soles of their boots. The air shimmered, and a low, guttural whisper seemed to pass on the wind, too faint to discern, too close to ignore. Sarah's eyes fixed on the house's grand, central window on the second floor. Detective Vance, whatever took Jennings and Taft is waiting. And I believe the initial, stolen, item was not the officers, but time itself. Eli and Sarah moved toward the front door of the Hawthorne House. The humming was now a physical sensation, vibrating in their teeth and rattling the glass in the ancient window panes. Breaching protocol, Eli announced, drawing his sidearm. On 3. 1, Sarah stopped him, pointing to the massive, intricately carved oak door. Look closer, Detective. The heavy door wasn't locked, it was welded. not by heat, but by a slick, gelatinous substance that had solidified into a clear, impenetrable barrier across the seams. The obsidian residue isn't just a residue, Sarah noted, examining the seal with her light. It's a byproduct of a powerful, temporal containment field. Whatever is inside didn't want anything getting in or out. Eli holstered his weapon and produced a tactical crowbar from his belt. Doesn't matter. It's coming down. It took 3 hard, grunting efforts, but the brittle seal finally cracked with a sound like splintering ice. The door gave way, scraping heavily across the floor. The air inside was instantly colder, drier, and carried the heavy scent of ozone mixed with antique paper and decaying velvet. The entry hall was immense, but unsettlingly wrong. The staircase, though grand, seemed to rise at an unnatural angle, and the corridor stretching back appeared to converge too quickly, defying the known laws of perspective. It was a non-Euclidean space, designed to disorient. Stay on the center line, Vance, Sarah advised, her voice hushed. Don't trust your peripheral vision. They followed the center hall, flashlights sweeping over dusty portraits of long-dead occupants whose eyes seemed to follow them. They searched the ground floor, the drawing room, the library, the kitchen, all empty, yet permeated by the faint, persistent smell of burnt ozone. Finally, at the back of the house, they found a door completely unlike the others. It was made of featureless, heavy steel, crudely bolted into the century-old plaster wall. This wasn't part of the original structure, Eli observed, noticing the fresh mortar around the frame. It was sealed recently. Sarah didn't wait. She knelt and produced a compact, specialized scanning device. It whined softly, and a 3D thermal image popped up on its screen. The internal temperature is unnaturally high. And look at this, she whispered, pointing to the image. The room is lined entirely with lead and a layer of ceramic shielding. It's designed to contain electromagnetic energy and radioactive decay. Eli stepped back, his hand again on his sidearm. This isn't a storage room, Reyes. It's a tomb, or a lab. Using a small, precise explosive charge, Sarah disabled the bolts. Eli kicked the door inward. The room was small, square, and illuminated by a single, pulsing source. Every wall was covered, floor to ceiling, with perfectly organized, labeled, and archived items, dozens of artifacts, each pinned to a corkboard like grotesque butterflies. Eli's breath caught. He recognized some of them. A chipped porcelain doll head from the 1998 Oak Ridge missing child case. A bloodied, antique pocket watch from the 1971 Boston Ripper murders. A charred silver locket from the cold case of the missing student, Eliza Cross, whose audio had been spliced into the 9/11 call. This is a collector's gallery, Eli said, his voice laced with disgust. A collection of stolen anchors, trophies from unsolved cases. Someone has been gathering objects connected to high-profile disappearances and deaths across the state for decades. In the center of the room, resting on a pedestal carved from dark wood, was the source of the light, a perfectly clear, pulsating glass orb. It wasn't large, no bigger than a softball, but it was vibrating with internal energy, giving off a soft, high-pitched hum, and directly beneath it, a small pile of the dark, crystalline obsidian dust, identical to the sample they found in the patrol car, was slowly being absorbed into the glass orb. The orb is the engine, Detective, Sarah said, her face pale. It's not holding the energy, it's processing it. And the dust is the fuel. It's a conduit for the theft of energy, or life, from the stolen items. As Sarah reached out a gloved hand to scan the orb, a figure suddenly materialized in the corner of the room. It was tall, impossibly thin, and shrouded in deep shadow, its form indistinct, like a smudge in reality. It was holding a tattered, old police uniform, Officer Jennings' uniform, and as it dropped the fabric, a soundless scream seemed to echo in the room. The orb reacted violently. It pulsed once, a blinding flash of white-blue light, accompanied by a sound like a thunderclap ripping the fabric of space. Eli instinctively shielded his face, throwing himself and Sarah back against the steel door. When the light faded, the humming was gone. The orb was dark. And the tall, shadowed figure was gone. Eli staggered to his feet, checking his vision. Reyes. Are you hit? Sarah was rubbing her temple, her face etched with confusion. No, but, look. She pointed to the doorway. The steel door they had just blown open was now replaced by the original, heavy oak door, which was intact, sealed with the same impenetrable, solidified gelatin. Eli rushed to the nearest window. The dilapidated Hawthorne House was still outside. But the air smelled different. The trees were thicker, wilder. And hanging from a tall, rusted pole near the gate was a small, faded flag, not the one from Blackwood Creek, but an archaic, obsolete banner Eli dimly recognized from history books. Sarah's eyes scanned her tablet's internal chronometer. The time was still 4:25 a.m. But the date displayed on the top corner was horrifying. November 11, 1985. We didn't just contain the energy, Detective, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling for the first time. We triggered it. The orb didn't steal time from the artifacts. It exchanged it with us. We're in 1985. The silence following the temporal shift was absolute, the low, electronic whine of Sarah's tablet the only sound. Eli stared at the date, November 11, 1985, then back at the oak door, perfectly sealed, trapping them within the sterile, chilling room. This is impossible, Reyes, Eli ground out, lowering his weapon. A hallucination. Gas. Anything but time travel. The obsidian dust, the non-Euclidean angles, the temporal signature of the orb, it all points to a high-level manipulation of reality, Detective, Sarah countered, her pragmatism overriding her shock. She was already busy scanning the sealed steel room for another exit, or the shadowed figure that vanished. The house is no longer an abandoned mansion. It's an active structure, 40 years ago. We need to assume that the authorities in this era, this 1985 Blackwood Creek Police Department, will see us as intruders, or worse, fugitives. They managed to pry open a small, ventilation panel near the ceiling, wide enough for Sarah to squeeze through first. She reported back. The corridor outside was no longer the dusty, desolate hall they entered. It was brightly lit, freshly painted institutional beige, and smelled of disinfectant and strong floor wax. The chilling reality hit them. They were inside an active building. Eli followed, sliding out into a corridor that looked identical to the inner workings of a modern police precinct, but dated by the chunky, beige landline phones and fluorescent lights that hummed incessantly. They quickly covered their contemporary uniforms with the dusty, heavy leather jackets they wore, doing their best to look like plainclothes officers from the era. They cautiously moved toward a large, double-door marked administration. Through the small, wire-meshed window, Eli saw a uniformed sergeant, younger, chubbier, and with a full head of hair, that Eli vaguely recognized as a retired captain from his precinct's current timeline. This is Blackwood Creek PD, all right, Eli muttered. And we're wearing the wrong badge, 4 decades too early. Sarah noticed a small, cluttered utility room next to the administration office. In here, Vance. We need intelligence. Inside the utility room, they found what they needed, a stack of weekly duty logs, bound in heavy cardboard. Eli snatched the topmost file from the day, November 11, 85. He flipped frantically through the pages, his heart sinking with every entry. The handwriting was neat, the columns filled with familiar names and shift times. Then, he saw it on the log for the graveyard shift, 03:45 HRS, dispatch received 911 hang-up from Hawthorne Estate. Audio anomaly noted. 4 o'clock HRS, Patrol Unit 4 Sierra, Officers J. Jennings and D. Taft, dispatched to investigate. Code 4 to 7 on file, suspicious activity. 4:10 HRS, Unit 4 Sierra transmits a brief, corrupted code 99, officer needs assistance. Beacon flatlines. 4:30 HRS, Major Crimes Detectives, unlisted, ordered to secure perimeter and begin investigation of missing personnel, Jennings/Taft. Eli read the names again, Jennings and Taft. The same officers who disappeared just moments ago in his 2025 timeline. Look, Reyes, Eli said, his voice ragged, handing her the log. The date is 1985. The names are the same. The time, the car, the code 99. It's the exact same event. Sarah studied the log, her face a mask of cold analysis. This isn't a coincidence, Detective. It's a temporal anchor. The orb didn't just move us in time, it put us directly into a repeating loop associated with the Hawthorne House. The disappearance of Jennings and Taft is the catalyst, the event that resets the cycle. So, what? We're doomed to repeat this every 40 years? No, Sarah said, pointing to a footnote scrawled near the bottom of the log, handwritten and faint, note, suspect non-human involvement. Reference confidential file, 47A/Obsidian key, file 47A, Eli breathed. That's our case file number right now. The one we were assigned just hours ago. They used the same designation then, too. Suddenly, the door to the utility room swung open. A heavy-set man in a crisp 1980s detective suit stood there, chewing on an unlit cigar. He looked angry and impatient. What in the hell are you two doing in my supply closet? I haven't seen you around before. New transfers? You've got a look on your faces like you've seen a ghost. Detective Miller sent me to find you. He said you need to report to the basement lab immediately. The Hawthorne anomaly is escalating, and they found a bizarre chronometer that just appeared. Eli and Sarah exchanged a look of sheer terror. Detective Miller, the same name as the sergeant who had sent them to the house in 2025. And a chronometer that just appeared, could it be the orb? Who exactly did Miller say sent you to the basement, detective? Eli asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The man squinted, pulling the cigar from his mouth. He didn't. He just said to find the two detectives who look like they don't belong here. Now move. The faster we figure out what happened to those boys, the better. And don't touch anything in that lab. It's under strict control by Project Echo. Eli and Sarah had no choice but to comply. The detective, whom Eli recognized from an old precinct photo as Detective Marcus Thorne, ushered them out of the utility room and toward a rarely used stairwell near the back of the precinct. Basements restricted, you know, Thorne grumbled, leading the way. But this Hawthorne business is above the pay grade of standard police work. We've been running a deep cover operation here for 2 years now. Project Echo. As they descended the cold concrete steps, the humming, which had faded during their time shift, began to return, subtler now, but with an underlying, mechanical rhythm. The basement was a stark contrast to the dated floors above. It was sleek, modern, for 1985, and highly pressurized. They passed through a heavy, electronically locked door labeled PE Control. Inside, the room was a hive of quiet, anxious activity. Technicians in sterile white coats monitored banks of vintage computer terminals displaying complex, pulsing graphs. The air was charged with static electricity. In the center of the main lab, set upon a reinforced steel table, was the object Thorne had called the chronometer. It was the glass orb they had encountered moments before in the sealed room, now glowing with a sickly, intermittent green light. A tall, formidable woman in a lab coat, her face etched with exhaustion and frustration, approached them. You're the new major crimes guys? I'm Dr. Anya Sharma, head of Echo. Thorne, you can leave. I need to brief these two. As Thorne retreated, grumbling about paperwork, Dr. Sharma wasted no time. The Hawthorne anomaly is a temporal rupture point, she stated, gesturing to the glowing orb. This thing, we call it the chronometer, appeared on this very table, completely displacing a 3-month-old water cooler, exactly 40 years to the day after we logged its first appearance in 1945. It's spitting out energy readings we can't quantify. Sarah stepped closer to the chronometer, her eyes scanning the complex readouts. The energy is quantified, Doctor. It's highly concentrated, crystallized human time. We saw the residue, the obsidian dust. Dr. Sharma stared at Sarah, her professional veneer slipping into confusion. The obsidian dust? How do you know about the obsidian key? We've read the log entry, file 47A, Eli interjected quickly, keeping their background vague. We're investigating the repeating disappearance of officers Jennings and Taft. We need to see that file. Dr. Sharma looked hesitant, but the urgency of the moment outweighed protocol. It's in the archives. Follow me. She led them into a secure, soundproof vault. Inside, she pulled a heavy, leather-bound folder from a shelf marked Restricted/Echo T. The title was handwritten, 47A/Obsidian key. Eli opened the file. Inside were grainy photographs of the Hawthorne House, complex chemical analyses of the obsidian dust, and meticulous hand-drawn diagrams of the non-Euclidean geometry of the main hall, but the final page held the core theory, the true horror. It was an entry from a consulting temporal physicist, dated 11/10/1985, hypothesis: the entity associated with the Hawthorne chronometer is not hostile in the traditional sense. It does not kill subjects, Jennings/Taft. It performs a highly localized temporal exchange. It harvests a specific amount of high-grade human time, likely the last 40 years of a subject's potential lifespan, and uses that energy to fuel the chronometer, initiating a 40-year jump forward. The entity is feeding the house itself, maintaining the rupture point, waiting for the cycle to bring fresh energy back to its origin point. The entity isn't taking their lives, Vance, Sarah whispered, her face pale as she read the passage. It's stealing their future. It uses the officers' remaining time to push the chronometer, and the entire house, 40 years ahead, resetting the loop. When the house reappears in 2025, it lures the next pair of officers, perpetuating the cycle. And the shadowed figure we saw? Eli asked, pointing to a sketch of the tall, angular form on the file's margin. Dr. Sharma nodded, her eyes wide. We call him the collector. He's the operator. The one who retrieves the newly charged chronometer from the future, or in your case, brings the current one back to the past, to keep the engine running. Just then, an alarm shrieked in the main lab. A technician yelled, Dr. Sharma. The chronometer, it's reacting to something in the ventilation. Energy spike is off the charts. Eli and Sarah spun around. A faint cloud of the familiar, dark obsidian dust was drifting down from the ventilation shaft above the steel table. The collector had followed them into the past. The chronometer pulsed a violent red this time, and the deep, resonating hum intensified, shaking the very structure of the basement. He's initiating the next jump. Sarah cried. He's stealing time now to jump us all back to 2025. The blast of crimson energy from the chronometer was overwhelming. Eli heard Dr. Sharma scream, and then the air pressure dropped violently. The world dissolved into a blinding, painful cascade of fractured images, old newspaper clippings, faces frozen in terror, and the cryptic spiral symbol spinning faster and faster. Then, silence. Eli slammed onto a dusty, hardwood floor, the impact driving the air from his lungs. He coughed, the smell of ozone replaced by the familiar, damp mustiness of the abandoned Hawthorne house they had entered in the beginning. He checked his watch. The time was 4:35 a.m. The date was now November 11, 2025. They were back. Sarah scrambled to her feet beside him, her face grim. Dr. Sharma was lying unconscious a few feet away, her white lab coat stained with dust. The chronometer was gone, presumably taken by the collector back to its resting place, the sealed room. The collector used us, Vance, Sarah rasped, dusting off her tactical pants. He knew we'd follow the loop, and he used the residual energy we carried from the past, along with the dust he dropped, to power the jump. We didn't escape, we were delivered. The humming from Part 2 was back, deeper and more menacing now, originating from somewhere directly above them. They had landed in the ground floor hallway. We need to find Jennings and Taft, Eli said, gripping his weapon. If the theory is right, they aren't dead. Just suspended. They followed the intensified humming up the impossibly steep and crooked staircase, the non-Euclidean angles of the house now fully manifesting in their present timeline. They found them in the main bedroom on the second floor. Officers Jennings and Taft were suspended 6 feet above the antique four-poster bed, floating in the center of the room. They weren't tethered or held by any visible force. They were simply there. Their uniforms were pristine, their faces frozen in expressions of pure, silent, wide-eyed terror. Their skin was waxy, pallid, and strangely luminous, but they were breathing, shallow, imperceptible breaths. They looked like mannequins carved from fear. Around them, swirling in a slow, circular motion, was a faint, shimmering, golden dust, the crystallized stolen time. They're not aging, Sarah whispered, pulling out a specialized temporal sensor. The sensor immediately spiked, shrieking a high-pitched alarm. Their life processes are active, but their temporal stream is shut down. They are a living battery, detective. the collector has isolated their remaining 40 years of potential life, and he's slowly siphoning that energy into the chronometer. Suddenly, the ambient light in the room dimmed, plunging them into near darkness. A new sound began, a soft, feminine weeping, originating from the corner of the room. "He knows we're here," Eli muttered, aiming his flashlight. Sarah grabbed his arm, pulling the light beam away. "Don't shine the light, Vance. It's not the collector. It's the first victim." A translucent, shimmering silhouette coalesced in the dark corner. It was the form of a young woman in vintage 2012 clothing, her long hair draped over her face. The weeping was real, laced with an unimaginable sadness. "Eliza Cross," Sarah breathed, recognizing the spectral figure. The missing student whose audio was used in the 911 call. "She's the true anchor." The figure slowly raised her head, her face indistinct, blurry, but her eyes, large, empty voids, focused directly on Sarah. A voice, not from the air but from inside Eli's skull, echoed with agonizing grief. "He promised me freedom, freedom from time. But he only stole, and now I help him steal others." "She's the bait, detective," Sarah stated, ignoring the spectral presence and flipping through the 1985 file they had brought with them. "The collector didn't just steal her time, he corrupted her consciousness, making her a part of the house's lure." The audio loop was her final, despairing cry. Sarah pointed to a diagram in file 47. "Look. The only way to stop the chronometer's charge, and therefore break the loop, is not to destroy the machine, but to introduce an equal and opposite temporal signature. Something that proves the collector's promise of freedom from time is a lie." As she spoke, the weeping intensified. The air around the floating officers grew hot and volatile. The shimmering golden dust began to rush inward, toward the center of the room, charging the atmosphere. Clang, the steel door to the sealed room downstairs, the one that should have been locked and hidden, suddenly slammed open, echoing through the house. The heavy, shuffling footsteps of the collector were ascending the stairs, slow and deliberate. Sarah's eyes locked onto the ghost of Eliza Cross. "We have to show her what real time is, Vance. Not the stolen kind." She produced a small, leather-bound journal, an artifact she'd subtly taken from the 1985 lab. It was Eliza Cross's diary, recovered by Project Echo decades ago. "When she was alive, she wrote about her future," Sarah said, her voice urgent. "She wrote about her family. If she sees the evidence of the future she was stolen from, it will overload her anchor point and destabilize the loop." The heavy, dragging footsteps ceased just outside the bedroom door. The shadow that entered was vast and oppressive, extinguishing the little light that remained in the hall. The collector was even more terrifying up close than Eli remembered. It was not a physical being but a disruption, an impossibly tall, skeletal framework of darkness. Where eyes should have been, there were only twin, swirling vortices that seemed to suck in ambient light. "Reyes, go. I'll buy you time," Eli yelled, shoving Sarah toward the weeping ghost of Eliza Cross. Eli raised his service weapon and fired 3 round centermass. The gunshots were deafening in the confined space. Thwump. 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 The bullets didn't pierce the entity, they were simply absorbed. The smoky outline of the collector shimmered, and a sickening sound of metal being crushed echoed as the 3 slugs flattened and dropped harmlessly to the floor, instantly corroded and aged. "You cannot harm what does not fully exist in your time," the collector rasped, its voice a hollow chorus of whispers and echoes, seeming to come from every direction at once. It took a single, slow step into the room, and the air around Officers Jennings and Taft grew suddenly colder, the golden dust intensifying its frantic swirling. The entity's elongated, jointed hand reached out, not toward Eli, but toward the suspended officers. Eli roared, dropping his pistol and lunging forward. He tackled the creature low, utilizing his training to go for the weak points. But there were none. Impact was like hitting a wall of pressurized smoke. Eli's muscles seized up as a wave of intense cold and sickening vertigo washed over him. He felt the terrifying sensation of being momentarily removed from time. "He's harvesting time through physical contact," Sarah screamed from across the room, desperately thumbing through Eliza Cross's diary. "Don't touch him, Vance." Eli scrambled back, shaking off the paralyzing temporal shock. He realized that conventional force was useless. He needed a distraction, something non-physical. He grabbed his high-powered LED flashlight and aimed the concentrated beam directly into the swirling vortices that served as the collector's eyes. The beam didn't illuminate the entity. It caused it pain. The collector recoiled with a shuddering, silent convulsion. Light, the unstolen, honest energy of the present, was anathema to it. This bought Sarah the window she needed. She knelt directly in front of the weeping specter of Eliza Cross, ignoring the blinding rush of the golden temporal dust gathering around the officers. Sarah opened the leather-bound diary and held it up to the ghost. Eliza. Look. This is your journal. You wrote this here. You wrote about your future. About your sister's wedding in 2015. About your dream to be a painter in 2020. The ghost continued to weep, the sound ragged and broken. Lies. All lies. The collector said that future was pain. He offered me peace. Freedom from the agony of waiting. He lied to you. Sarah shouted over the rising hum. She pointed to a faded ink drawing of a young woman with a wedding veil. Your sister did get married. In the timeline you were stolen from, you were the maid of honor. You were there. You were real. As Sarah spoke the final word, the translucent figure of Eliza Cross paused. The empty voids of her eyes focused on the drawing. The weeping stopped. A new emotion, a devastating surge of regret and betrayal, washed over the room. The golden dust swirling around Jennings and Taft suddenly shuddered and reversed direction, rushing back toward Eliza. The specter of Eliza Cross screamed, a sound that was pure temporal feedback, a disruption of the stolen timeline. She wasn't just reacting, she was overloading her own stolen temporal signature. She's breaking the anchor. Sarah yelled. The collector, still reeling from the light, spun toward Eliza, its shadowy form vibrating with furious energy. No. The harvest is complete. The cycle is absolute. It lunged at Eliza, its hand transforming into a rake of pure darkness, intent on crushing her true consciousness before it could disrupt the loop, before the entity could reach her. The ghost of Eliza Cross vanished in a blinding flash of white light, taking the surge of reverse temporal dust with her. The living battery, Jennings and Taft, were immediately released, dropping onto the old four-poster bed with a heavy thud, breathing hard, but alive. The collector shrieked, a sound that fractured the glass of every window in the room. The temporal energy was gone, the loop was broken, and its fuel source was exhausted. Eli, breathing heavily, knew this was their only chance. He's running on fumes, Reyes. We need to destroy the engine. The chronometer. The vanishing of Eliza Cross and the golden dust left a temporal vacuum in the room. Officers Jennings and Taft lay on the bed, gasping, their 40 years of stolen potential life returned, but leaving them traumatized and disoriented. The collector, reeling from the feedback, shrank rapidly, its immense, dark form condensing into a shimmering, enraged column of shadow. You have undone the cycle. The harvest requires sustenance, its voice roared, a frantic, desperate wave of noise. It knew the chronometer downstairs was its only remaining power source. Get them out of here, Reyes. Eli shouted, grabbing Jennings' arm. He's heading for the sealed room. He wants the residual charge. Sarah, recovering Dr. Sharma, who was still unconscious but breathing, nodded grimly. The sealed room is the only place left with enough charge to restart the loop. But he won't let us get there easily. They began their frantic retreat, dragging the disoriented officers and the unconscious doctor. As they reached the top of the main staircase, the collector let out a final, ear-splitting shriek. The oppressive humming returned, not from the earth this time, but from the very walls of the house. The non-Euclidean geometry, the impossible angles and warped perspective, suddenly became volatile. The steps beneath Eli's feet twisted. The grand staircase, which had been steep, suddenly stretched out, becoming a shallow, unending ramp that seemed to lead nowhere. The heavy, ornate banister liquefied into black, viscous goo before solidifying instantly into jagged metal. He's resealing the house. Sarah yelled, struggling to keep her balance as the floor tilted sharply. He's using his last energy to lock us in this collapsing reality. Eli and Sarah fought gravity and the shifting structure, pulling their four inert burdens down the wildly fluctuating staircase. Jennings whimpered, Taft vomited, and Dr. Sharma remained a dead weight. As they reached the first floor landing, the main hallway, which should have led straight to the back of the house, had split. Two identical corridors now stretched out, one leading to the right, the other to the left, both looking exactly the same, leading to an impossible choice. It's a fractal lock, Sarah cried, examining the floor, which was coated in a thin layer of the obsidian dust. This isn't a physical maze, it's a temporal one. Each path leads to a different moment in the house's history, not a different location. Which one leads to the sealed room? Eli demanded, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Sarah looked at the dust swirling at their feet, driven by an invisible current of energy. The energy flow. The residual charge from the chronometer is pulling the dust. Look! She pointed to the left corridor. While the dust lay still in the right passage, a faint, almost invisible current was dragging the tiny, crystalline particles into the hallway on the left. That's the path of the stolen time. Eli yelled. They plunged down the left corridor. It was strangely warm, and the air smelled faintly of formaldehyde and old laboratory chemicals, the lingering scent of Project Echo from 1985. The collector had merged the timelines, making the house a patchwork of different realities. The corridor quickly opened into the back area of the house. The heavy, sealed steel door of the research lab from the 1985 timeline was now visible. It was vibrating violently, trying to hold its form against the decay of the rest of the house. The collector was already there. It was severely diminished, hunched over, its shadowy form flickering like a failing candle. It was frantically trying to pry open the steel door, desperate to reclaim the chronometer. He's fading. He used too much energy on the house. Eli shouted. They dropped Jennings, Taft, and the doctor behind a pillar for cover. Vance, look! Sarah pointed. The steel door was locked by a complex, multi-dial combination lock, a mechanical security system from the 1985 timeline. It's the Project Echo lock. We don't have the combination, Eli said, running toward the entity, knowing he couldn't let it touch that door. The collector noticed them. With a final, furious surge, it abandoned the door and lunged at Eli, compressing its remaining energy into a shadowy, blade-like appendage. Eli dodged, falling to the floor. The dark appendage slammed into the steel door, not denting it, but freezing the lock's dial in place. The observer had inadvertently provided the solution. The observer set the code, Sarah realized, running past the struggling Eli to the lock. The dials are set to the chronometer's key dates. November 11th, 1985. The time the loop begins. As the collector thrashed weakly at Eli, Sarah frantically manipulated the frozen dial, inputting the chronological code. With a heavy clunk, the steel door unlocked. The collector let out one final, agonizing shriek of frustration and began to vaporize into thin air, its time and energy finally exhausted. Eli grabbed Sarah's arm. It's fading. Get in. Destroy the orb now. They burst through the steel door into the sealed room. The chronometer, sitting on its pedestal, was pulsing with a weak, sickly green light, rapidly decaying. Eli burst into the secured room, his adrenaline still surging. The chronometer, the glass orb, sat on the pedestal, pulsing with a weak, sickly green light. It was decaying rapidly, its power source exhausted. Eli didn't hesitate. He raised his weapon, lining up the shot to shatter the orb and end the nightmare. Wait, Vance. Don't shoot, Sarah yelled, throwing herself in front of the pedestal. Eli lowered the pistol, frustration boiling over. Reyes. That thing runs the loop. It's what took my officers. It has to be destroyed. Sarah grabbed his jacket, her eyes blazing with urgency. Listen to me. The physics have changed. Destroying it now would be catastrophic. The chronometer is holding the highly compressed energy of the loop. If we shatter it now, it won't just break, it will release a massive temporal feedback wave. What does that mean? It means a localized time paradox, Sarah explained, pulling Eli toward the edge of the room. It would instantly age every single person in this house to dust, including us, Jennings, Taft, and the doctor. Worse, the temporal fracture would likely tear Blackwood Creek out of the present timeline entirely. The chronometer is not a bomb, detective, it's a prison. Eli stared at the orb, its soft green glow a grotesque mockery of peace. So, if we can't destroy it, how do we shut it down? We have to ground the temporal energy, safely, Sarah replied, her mind racing as she looked around the sealed room. We need a massive, isolated energy sink. Something that can absorb the time without fracturing. As they discussed their desperate options, the steel door they had entered through suddenly slammed shut with a terrible, resonant clang. They were sealed in. Then, an anomaly occurred on the pedestal itself. Where the collector had been frantically trying to access the orb moments ago, a fresh layer of the obsidian dust quickly accumulated and spontaneously began to rearrange itself. The dust wasn't random, it was forming a message, etching itself directly into the cold metal of the pedestal base. It was the collector's final act, its dying warning. The obsidian script was complex, the jagged spiral symbol repeating, but Eli recognized the English words forming beneath the symbol. 47, /obsidian key is only the lock. The harvester has awakened. The harvester? Eli muttered, his blood running cold. He said he was the collector. Who is the harvester? Sarah read the message, her face pale. The collector was just an operator, Vance. A tool in the loop. The harvester is the entity that created the loop, the one that devised the temporal exchange. It's the one who promised Eliza Cross freedom from time. The one who runs the house. She pointed to the original 1985 file they had brought with them. Project Echo always theorized an intelligence controlling the collector, but they never encountered it. The collector was merely maintaining the status quo, the 40-year cycle. But now we broke the cycle, Eli finished, looking back at the message. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. By removing the temporal charge from the victims and forcing the collector to exhaust itself, we didn't end the threat, we eliminated the mechanism. We broke the lock. And now, the true master of the Hawthorne House, the harvester, the creator of the phenomenon, is no longer content with the slow, 40-year harvest. It has awakened, and it's right here. As if on cue, a deep, grinding sound resonated through the steel floor beneath them. It was a sound of immense rock shifting, of foundations twisting. The steel room they were in, the most structurally sound part of the house, began to shake violently. A high-pitched, electronic whine erupted from the chronometer. Instead of decaying, the orb suddenly intensified its glow, changing from sickly green to a deep, resonant indigo. It's charging again. Sarah cried. But how? The collector is gone. Eli pointed to the ceiling. A viscous, oily black liquid, different from the sticky sealant on the door, was beginning to drip rapidly from the ceiling vents. It's the harvester, Reyes, Eli said, gripping his weapon, realizing the true horror. It's inside the structure. It's the house itself. And it's feeding the chronometer directly, preparing for a harvest that won't wait another 40 years. The room shook violently as the chronometer pulsed with an aggressive, deep indigo light, indicating an immense, raw charge of temporal energy. The harvester, the intelligence embedded in the structure of the Hawthorne House, was feeding its engine directly. The oily, black liquid dripping from the ceiling vents was now pouring down in thick streams, coalescing on the floor. The harvester is trying to stabilize the orb and initiate an immediate, high-yield temporal harvest. Sarah shouted, pulling an emergency flashlight from her bag. We need to use the containment system from the 1985 Project Echo lab. Eli looked around the steel-plated room. The lead shielding and ceramic tiles? How do we turn that into an energy sink? We don't have time to build an external ground. We have to reverse the polarity of the chronometer's containment field and use the shielding as an emergency buffer. Sarah was already sprinting to a massive, outdated control panel near the far wall, the operational controls for Project Echo's primary containment unit. Before Sarah could reach the panel, the oily black substance on the floor solidified. It didn't form a creature, but a series of thick, massive tendrils, glistening and pulsating. They shot out, not toward Eli, but directly toward the fragile control panel and the pedestal holding the chronometer. It's protecting its infrastructure. Eli yelled, drawing his knife and charging the nearest tendril. The tendrils were surprisingly resilient, made of densely compressed shadow and the house's toxic, temporal essence. Eli slashed at one, the blade scraping against the oily surface with a sound like tearing metal. The tendril barely reacted, simply retracting a section before whipping back out toward the control panel. "I need 3 minutes, Vance," Sarah screamed, frantically ripping open the panel casing, exposing a maze of brittle, vintage wiring. Eli knew he couldn't fight them physically. He glanced at the chronometer, now glowing with a blinding intensity. Its light was painful, radiating pure, harvested time that he remembered the collector's reaction to the flashlight in the previous part. Light was anathema to the stolen, compressed darkness. Eli grabbed one of the thick, lead-lined pipes protruding from the wall, part of the 1985 containment structure, and held it like a baseball bat. He swung it wildly, connecting with one of the pulsating tendrils. The impact was heavy, but ineffective. Then, Eli had a terrifying idea. He ran back toward the chronometer. "What are you doing?" "Stay away from that," Sarah cried, focused on splicing a handful of crucial wires. Eli didn't answer. He jammed the end of his tactical flashlight directly into the pedestal, right beside the chronometer. He then pressed the flashlight's button, locking it on its highest, focused setting. The powerful beam hit the orb at its base. The chronometer shrieked, not audibly, but in a way that vibrated the bones in Eli's skull. The sudden, honest light caused a localized temporal feedback loop right at the pedestal. The tendrils, which were an extension of the harvester's consciousness and powered by the chronometer, immediately recoiled, flailing back toward the ceiling, away from the feedback. The oily black substance hissed and began to retreat, briefly exposing the control panel. "Now, Reyes." Sarah slammed a spliced bundle of wires into a large, sparking conduit. The control panel exploded with a burst of sparks, and the entire steel room was momentarily bathed in an emergency, harsh yellow light. The chronometer's indigo glow suddenly dropped, its light flickering weakly. The energy was being diverted. "I've rerouted the main temporal conduits. The energy is being channeled into the room's lead shielding. The walls are now acting as a giant temporal circuit breaker," Sarah announced, clutching her singed hands. The harvester was not defeated, merely contained. The massive tendrils reformed, now thinner, more focused, and wildly desperate. They didn't go for the control panel, they went straight for the two detectives. Eli grabbed Sarah, pulling her toward the pedestal. The harvester, sensing its ultimate defeat, began to shake the house so violently that the steel door buckled inward. The voice of the harvester, a deep, resonant rumble of agony and rage, filled the room. "You cannot contain me. I am the structure. I am the time. I will have the full harvest. I will tear this world apart." In its final act, the harvester forced the steel door to open just enough for the tendrils to retreat entirely, pulling the oily black substance and the chronometer's energy out of the containment room and back into the main house structure. "It's retreating, but it's taking the orb with it," Eli shouted. As the steel door sealed itself shut again, the final words of the harvester echoed, not from the walls, but from a speaker Eli only now realized was built into the control panel. A final threat: "I will complete the ultimate harvest. I will take everything." The instant the steel door sealed, the aggressive shaking of the house abruptly ceased. Eli and Sarah paused, listening to the silence, a silence far more terrifying than the house's previous cacophony. They quickly used the tactical crowbar to pry the door open again and rushed back into the corridor, only to find the entire geography of the house had changed. The non-Euclidean angles and the twin corridors were gone. The labyrinthine structure had stabilized into one single, massive, cylindrical chamber. The walls were now slick, black, and monolithic, rising into a vaulted ceiling that was impossibly high. In the center of the vast, circular floor, huddled together near a pillar for comfort, were Officers Jennings, Taft, and Dr. Sharma. They were conscious but paralyzed by terror, their eyes wide and fixed on the ceiling. "Vance. Reyes. Look," Jennings whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. Eli and Sarah looked up. The ceiling, the centuries-old plaster and wood of the Hawthorne House, was gone. It had been replaced by a perfect, crystalline, and terrifyingly clear view of the night sky, but this wasn't the normal night sky. The stars were not static points of light. They were moving, violently. The entire celestial dome was rotating at an impossible speed. Stars were streaking into brilliant, blurring lines, and distant galaxies were warping and stretching like paint on a canvas. The cosmos itself was accelerating before their eyes. "The harvester. It's doing it," Dr. Sharma stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the churning cosmos. It initiated the ultimate harvest. It's not taking individual time anymore. It's taking the time of the region itself. Sarah produced her temporal sensor again. The readings were spiking wildly, exceeding any limits she had ever seen. It's using the chronometer to draw a temporal vacuum directly through the atmosphere above Blackwood Creek, Sarah confirmed, her voice tight with professional dread. It's harvesting the future of the entire city, every person, every structure, every moment yet to come. If it continues, this city will simply be erased from the timeline. And there, suspended right beneath the rapidly blurring sky, glowing with its final, desperate indigo light, was the chronometer. It was held in place by a single, pulsing tendril of the black, oily substance, which acted like an umbilical cord, sucking the energy from the twisting cosmos above. The orb was feeding the harvester. We have to get up there, Eli stated, his focus laser sharp. We have to hit the orb and sever that umbilical cord. The problem was the height. The vaulted chamber was 30, perhaps 40 feet high, and the walls were too slick and sheer to climb. Suddenly, a voice, deep and resonant, thundered from the walls themselves, the final, embodied presence of the harvester, futility, detectives. The cycle ends now. I shall drink the decades, and this insignificant reality will be no more than dust. The chronometer is primed. The harvest is complete. As the harvester spoke, the indigo light from the orb surged one final time, causing the stars to spin so fast they began to fade into a blinding white void. Sarah looked down at the traumatized officers and the doctor. They're too weak to help. But Dr. Sharma's notes. Vance, look at the 1985 file. She flipped the file to a complex, faded diagram of the Hawthorne House's original electrical grid. The harvester is linked to the house's original power source. When we rerouted the energy in the basement, we created a temporal circuit breaker in the lead shielding, but the harvester just bypassed it by linking to the main power lines. Sarah explained rapidly. We can't reach the orb, but we can hit its power source. She pointed to the far end of the cylindrical room, where a single, ancient iron fuse box was mounted on the wall, partially obscured by the black residue. If we overload that main fuse box with an opposing energy current, we can force the harvester's core to shut down. But we need an equal and opposite energy source, something real and immediate to counter the stolen time. Eli looked down at his belt. He had his radio, his connection to the present, his connection to the real, unstolen timeline. The city's power grid won't be enough, Eli said, grabbing the fuse box cover and yanking it open. But this might be. The cylindrical chamber glowed with the furious, fading white light of the accelerating cosmos. The harvester was minutes, perhaps seconds, from completing the ultimate harvest and erasing Blackwood Creek. Eli tore open the brittle, ancient iron fuse box. Inside, the main circuits were buzzing, coated in the same oily black substance that formed the tendrils. We need an opposing energy source, Sarah. Fast! Eli shouted over the tremendous, grinding noise from the ceiling. Sarah looked at the exposed wires in the fuse box, then at the technological anchor they carried. The police radio. It's the highest frequency link to the outside world. It connects to the city's unstolen present. If we wire the radio directly to the main power conduits, the signal will become a localized, opposite temporal charge. It will short the entire system, Eli realized, grabbing his heavy, handheld radio unit. But the feedback, it's going to overload the current and the temporal field simultaneously. Whoever holds the radio will take the full electrical and temporal surge. I'll do it, Sarah stated, pulling two small, heavily insulated alligator clips from her kit. No, Eli commanded, his voice firm and final. You're the only one who understands the circuits. You connect the wires. I'll hold the anchor. He jammed the radio's antenna into the fuse box, wedging it against the thick, rubber-coated ground wire. The unit immediately began to hum, its LCD screen flickering violently as the harvester's energy attempted to corrupt the signal. Hurry, Reyes. Sarah worked with lightning speed, her hands steady despite the house's convulsions. She clipped one wire to the radio's metallic casing and stretched the other to the main power conduit, a thick, central copper line. It has to be a closed circuit, Vance. I have to connect this last wire to the power line to complete the loop. Hold the radio steady. the harvester realized their plan. The voice thundered one last time, filled with ultimate rage, and oh, you will not deny me. A massive column of the black, oily substance erupted from the center of the floor, condensing instantly into a solidified, razor-sharp spear. It didn't aim for Eli, the anchor. It aimed for Sarah, the key to the circuit. Sarah. Eli screamed. Sarah saw the attack coming, her eyes wide with grim determination. She held the final wire ready, poised to complete the circuit. Eli had only a split second. He couldn't let the harvester strike Sarah, or the circuit would never close. He couldn't let the spear hit the fuse box, or the plan would fail. He let go of the radio, grabbed the massive, sharp-edged steel spear with both hands, and pulled it off course. The moment Eli diverted the harvester's attack, Sarah slammed the final wire onto the main copper line. The circuit closed. A blinding, cataclysmic surge of pure energy erupted. The police radio, acting as the temporal anchor, shrieked a sound that was both an impossible static and a triumphant roar. Blue-white electricity and raw temporal energy, the force of the city's future, shot back into the chronometer circuit. The chronometer, suspended beneath the blurring sky, overloaded instantly. The indigo light flared into a massive, blinding white nova. The black tendril holding it evaporated. The orb didn't shatter. It imploded. The noise stopped. The grinding ceased. The swirling, blurring cosmos above them instantly stabilized. The sky was still, quiet, filled with the real, unstolen stars of the present. The harvester's influence was instantly gone. Eli staggered back from the fuse box, released the solidified spear of shadow and temporal sludge. He fell to his knees, his hands smoking, his eyes wide and vacant. He was breathing, but his dark leather jacket was smoking, fused to his skin in places. Sarah rushed to him. Vance. Eli. Talk to me. He looked at her, his lips cracked and dry. The loop, broken? Broken, Sarah confirmed, tears streaking the grime on her cheeks. The chronometer is gone. The harvester is silenced. The massive, cylindrical room faded, the black walls dissolving back into the dusty, dilapidated interior of the Hawthorne House. Officers Jennings and Taft stumbled to their feet, staring at their hands in disbelief. Dr. Sharma, now fully awake, grasped the reality of the temporal shift and ran to check the still-smoking fuse box. Eli slumped against the wall. The sacrifice had worked. The city was safe, but the temporal feedback had been brutal. Sarah scanned him with her sensor. The reading was catastrophic. Eli, you took the full surge of the temporal countercharge, she whispered, her voice choked with grief. Eli Vance, the detective who had spent his career looking into the abyss, felt a strange lightness, a profound peace. The fatigue, it's gone, Sarah, he said, a faint smile touching his lips. I saw the future, the real one. It's bright. He closed his eyes, his breathing slowing. Sarah, desperate, frantically